At my wedding rehearsal dinner, my fiancé's phone buzzed during the toast. He glanced at the screen, his face going white as winter snow. "I have to take this," he whispered, stepping away from our table of 50 guests. When he returned 20 minutes later, his hands were shaking and his voice cracked as he pulled me aside. "Maya, we need to cancel everything. The wedding, the honeymoon, all of it. My name is Maya Chen. I'm 27 years old. And if you think this story ends with a simple postponement and make-up sex, you're dead wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me paint the picture for you. The Grandview Manor in Millbrook Heights was supposed to be our fairy tale venue. Crystal chandeliers, ivory linens, 200 guests flying in from across the country. My dress, a custom Vera Wang that took 8 months to perfect, hung in the bridal suite like a promise. Tomorrow was supposed to be the most important day of my life. The day I became Mrs. Maya Torrino, wife of FBI Special Agent Marcus Torrino. Marcus and I had been together for 3 years. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland when he was working undercover narcotics and I was finishing my master's in forensic psychology. He was mysterious, intense, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room. When he finally told me he worked for the bureau, it explained so much: the late-night calls, the sudden business trips, the way he always seemed to be watching everyone around us. But tonight, something was different. Throughout dinner, I'd noticed him checking his phone more than usual. His jaw was tighter, his smile forced. When his supervisor called during my maid of honor speech about love conquering all obstacles, I should have known we were about to face our biggest test yet. The rehearsal dinner was perfect until that moment. My parents had flown in from Seattle, his family drove up from Sacramento. Everyone was laughing, sharing embarrassing stories, toasting our future together. The wedding coordinator had just confirmed that tomorrow's weather would be sunny and 75 degrees. Even my anxiety-prone mother was finally relaxed, chatting with Marcus's Italian grandmother about family recipes. But when Marcus stepped outside to take that call, something shifted in the air. I watched him through the floor-to-ceiling windows, pacing back and forth on the terrace, his free hand running through his dark hair, a nervous habit I'd learned to recognize over the years. Whatever news he was receiving was serious. FBI serious. When he came back inside, the color had completely drained from his face. He moved like someone in shock, navigating between tables of our guests with robotic precision. He barely made eye contact as he reached for my hand and led me to a quiet corner near the bar. "Maya," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That was my section chief. "There's been a development in a case I've been working on for the past 2 years. A major development." I felt my stomach drop. What kind of development? He looked around the room, at our families mingling and laughing, completely unaware that our perfect evening was about to implode. "The kind that means I have to leave tonight. The kind that means I can't tell you when I'll be back. The kind that means..." He swallowed hard. "The kind that means we can't get married tomorrow." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "What do you mean we can't get married?" "Marcus, we have 200 people here. The venue is paid for. My dress is upstairs. Your cousin flew in from Italy." "I know," he said, his dark eyes filled with something that looked like panic. "I know all of that. But Maya, this case, it's bigger than anything I've ever worked on. National security level. And my cover might be blown." The words hit me like ice water. "Your cover? What cover?" "You work financial crimes out of the Portland field office." For the first time in 3 years, Marcus couldn't meet my eyes. That's not exactly true." The room seemed to tilt around me. The laughter from our families, the clinking of champagne glasses, the soft jazz music, it all became background noise as I processed what he'd just said. "What do you mean that's not exactly true?" "Maya, I work deep cover operations. Have been for the past 5 years. The financial crimes thing it was part of my legend. My fake identity. He ran his hand through his hair again. Everything about my work that I've told you has been a lie. I felt like I was falling, even though I was standing perfectly still. Everything? The late nights at the office? The business trips to Seattle? Undercover operations. Some lasting weeks, some lasting months. His voice was getting quieter, as if saying it softly would somehow make it hurt less. Maya, I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you so many times, but preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But what? I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. But you thought it would be fun to build our entire relationship on lies? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen, and somehow his face went even paler. They need me in DC. Tonight. There's a plane waiting at the airport. A plane? Marcus, what the hell is going on? He looked around the room again, then back at me. The organization I've been infiltrating for 2 years just put a hit out on Marcus Torrino, FBI agent. Which means they might know about you too. The world stopped spinning. Everything went quiet except for the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. A hit? As in they want me dead, Maya. And anyone connected to me might be in danger too. I stood there, in my beautiful rehearsal dinner dress, surrounded by everyone I loved most in the world, and realized that the man I thought I knew, the man I was supposed to marry in 18 hours, was a complete stranger. And that was just the beginning. Tomorrow was supposed to be our wedding day. Instead, it was about to become the day I learned the truth about everything I thought I knew. And trust me, that truth was going to change everything about my life forever. If you think you know where this story is heading, think again. Because what I discovered in the next 24 hours would make tonight's revelations look like a minor misunderstanding. This isn't just about a cancelled wedding. This is about discovering that your entire reality has been carefully constructed fiction. So buckle up. Because Maya Chen's story is just getting started. The morning of what should have been my wedding day, I woke up alone in the bridal suite at Grandview Manor. Sunlight streamed through the gauze curtains, illuminating my wedding dress hanging like a ghost in the corner. For a moment, in that hazy space between sleep and consciousness, I forgot that my entire life had imploded 12 hours earlier. Then reality crashed back in. Marcus was gone. Our wedding was cancelled. And somewhere out there, dangerous people might be looking for me because of secrets my fiancé had been keeping for years. My phone showed 47 missed calls and over 100 text messages. My mother had been calling every 20 minutes since 6 a.m. My maid of honor Jessica had left increasingly frantic voicemails. The wedding coordinator was practically in hysterics, asking what to tell the vendors, the caterers, the florist who'd been setting up since dawn. But the message that made my blood run cold was from an unknown number, sent at 3:47 a.m., Maya Chen. We need to talk. Agent Sarah Kim, FBI. I'm in the lobby. I threw on the hotel robe and took the elevator down to find a petite Asian woman in a black suit sitting in the corner of the marble lobby, nursing what looked like her 4th cup of coffee. She stood when she saw me, her expression professional but not unkind. Ms. Chen. I'm Agent Kim. I work with Marcus, or rather, I work with Agent David Reeves. That's your fiancé's real name. Even his name was a lie. I sat down heavily in the chair across from her, trying to process this new information. David Reeves? Marcus Torrino is what we call a legend, a fabricated identity created for deep cover operations. David has been living as Marcus for 3 years now, ever since he was assigned to infiltrate the Kozlov crime syndicate. Agent Kim opened a tablet and showed me photos of men in expensive suits, surveillance shots taken from a distance. These are the people your fiancé has been trying to take down. They run everything from human trafficking to arms dealing along the West Coast. David managed to work his way into their inner circle by posing as a financial consultant helping them launder money. I stared at the photos, trying to reconcile these dangerous-looking strangers with the man who brought me coffee every morning and remembered to DVR my favorite cooking shows. So the man I fell in love with, he doesn't exist? That's complicated, Agent Kim said gently. David Reeves is real. His feelings for you are real. But yes, almost everything about his daily life for the past 3 years has been an elaborate cover story. She pulled up more files on her tablet. The coffee shop where you met? He was there on surveillance. The apartment he lives in? Bureau-funded safe house. His job at the financial firm? Complete fiction. Even his family that you met, they're all federal agents playing roles. The Italian grandmother who taught me to make pasta. The cousin who flew in from Italy for our wedding. All of them actors in an elaborate FBI production. I felt sick. How long have you known about me? I asked. Agent Kim hesitated. We've known about you since your second date. David reported the relationship immediately, as protocol requires. We ran a full background check, monitored your communications, assessed you as a potential security risk. A security risk? The words came out sharper than I intended. Standard procedure, she said quickly. We had to make sure you weren't connected to the Kozlov organization, weren't being used to get close to our agent. You checked out clean, brilliant psychology student, no criminal connections, no red flags. Just an innocent civilian who happened to fall for an undercover agent. I laughed bitterly. Lucky me. Ms. Chen, I need you to understand something. What happened last night, David's cover being blown, it's not just about him. These people don't leave loose ends. If they know about Marcus Torrino, FBI agent, they'll want to eliminate anyone who might have information about their operations. But I don't know anything about their operations, I protested. You know David. You know his habits, his routines, his safe houses. You know other agents who've been playing his family members. In their world, that makes you a liability. The hotel lobby suddenly felt too open, too exposed. I found myself scanning the faces of other guests, wondering if any of them were watching me. Agent Kim noticed my paranoia. We've had a protective detail on you since last night, she said. The 2 men reading newspapers by the elevator? They're ours. The woman at the front desk who keeps looking over here? Also ours. You're safe for now. For now? We need to relocate you. New identity, new city, at least until we can neutralize the threat. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. Ms. Chen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. In the 3 years you've been with David, has he ever brought anything home? Files, phones, documents, drives? Anything related to his work? I started to shake my head, then stopped. There's a laptop. He keeps it in our bedroom closet, behind some boxes. He said it was for personal stuff, but he was always very protective of it. Agent Kim's eyes sharpened. Can you get access to it? Yes. We live together. I have keys. The word live felt strange now. Did we live together? Or had I been living with a ghost, a fiction, a carefully constructed lie? Ms. Chen, that laptop might contain intelligence that could save David's life and bring down the entire Kozlov operation. But retrieving it would mean going back to your apartment, which is almost certainly being watched. I looked around the lobby at the agents pretending to read newspapers and check in guests. My wedding guests were probably already arriving at the church, confused and concerned. My parents were somewhere upstairs, dealing with the impossible task of explaining to relatives why their daughter's fairy tale had turned into a nightmare. And somewhere out there, the man I thought I loved was running for his life from people who wanted him dead. What do I need to do? I asked. Agent Kim smiled for the first time since we'd started talking. First, we need to convince everyone that you're just a heartbroken bride who doesn't know anything about anything. Then, we're going to turn you into the best civilian asset the FBI has ever had. I thought about my psychology degree, my research on criminal behavior, all the training that suddenly seemed relevant in ways I'd never imagined. Maybe this was the moment my real life finally began. But first, I had to survive it. The plan Agent Kim outlined was deceptively simple: act like a devastated bride while secretly helping the FBI retrieve crucial evidence from my apartment. What she didn't mention was how terrifying it would be to lie to everyone I'd ever loved while potentially walking into a trap. By noon, the Grandview Manor had transformed into a circus of confusion. Wedding guests arrived in their finest attire, only to be greeted by my tearful mother explaining that the ceremony was postponed indefinitely due to a family emergency. The confusion on their faces was heartbreaking. These people had traveled across the country, taken time off work, bought expensive gifts, all to celebrate a love story that had turned out to be an elaborate fiction. I sat in the bridal suite, still in my robe, watching through the window as the florist removed the white roses from the ceremony. Agent Kim had given me a script to follow, and I'd been practicing my lines like an actress preparing for the performance of her life. Jessica knocked on the door, her voice thick with worry. "Maya? Honey, can I come in? Your mom is downstairs crying into the wedding cake, and your dad is pacing holes in the marble. Everyone's asking what happened." I opened the door to find my best friend since college holding a box of tissues and wearing the dusty rose bridesmaid dress we'd picked out together 6 months ago. Her makeup was already smudged from crying, and seeing her broke something inside me. "Jess," I said, my voice cracking with genuine emotion. "I'm so sorry. I know how much trouble everyone went to." She immediately wrapped me in a hug. "Forget the trouble. Are you okay? Marcus looked like he'd seen a ghost when he left last night." "What happened?" I took a deep breath and delivered the first lie in what would become an exhausting day of deception. "His father had a heart attack. They had to rush him to emergency surgery in Sacramento. Marcus couldn't reach anyone yesterday because they were all at the hospital, and by the time he found out how serious it was..." The words felt like acid on my tongue. Marcus's father was actually Agent Robert Chen, a man I'd shared Thanksgiving dinner with, who'd taught me to play poker and told me embarrassing stories about Marcus's childhood. All lies, all performances, all part of an elaborate show I'd been unknowingly starring in for 3 years. "Oh my God," Jessica said, pulling back to look at me. "Is he going to be okay? Mr. Torrino seemed so healthy when we met him at the engagement party." "They don't know yet," I continued, hating myself with every word. "Marcus is flying back and forth between here and the hospital. We decided it was better to postpone than to get married while his family is going through this crisis." Jessica nodded, her eyes filling with tears again. "That makes sense. Family comes first. When do you think you'll reschedule?" The question hung in the air like a weight. When would Maya Chen and Marcus Torrino reschedule their wedding? Never, because Marcus Torrino didn't exist. When would Maya Chen and David Reeves get married? Probably never, because our entire relationship had been built on lies, and he was currently running from people who wanted to kill him. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Everything is so uncertain right now." Over the next few hours, I repeated variations of this story to my parents, my relatives, Marcus's fake family members who were all presumably FBI agents still playing their roles. Each conversation was an exercise in careful acting, balancing genuine emotion with calculated deception. My mother was the hardest to convince. She'd always been suspicious of Marcus's job, the way he was vague about his daily tasks, the sudden business trips. "Something doesn't feel right about this," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed while I pretended to pack. "In 3 years, we've never met any of his work colleagues. And yesterday, he seemed nervous about something completely unrelated to his father." "Mom, people process family crises differently," I said, folding clothes I had no intention of wearing. "You know how Marcus keeps things bottled up. But to not even call us? To let us find out at the rehearsal dinner that his father was in the hospital? Maya, that's not like him." She was right, of course. The Marcus I knew would have called immediately, would have been devastated, would have needed my support. But the Marcus I knew was a fiction, so his reactions to fictional family emergencies were impossible to predict. By late afternoon, most of the wedding guests had checked out of the hotel, leaving behind a wake of confused sympathy and rescheduled flights. The vendors had been dismissed, the flowers distributed to nursing homes, the cake donated to a local shelter. Agent Kim had orchestrated the entire dismantling with military precision, all while maintaining the cover story about Marcus's family emergency. As evening approached, she briefed me on the next phase of our operation. "Your apartment is definitely under surveillance," she said, showing me photos taken from a van across the street. "We've identified at least 3 Kozlov associates watching the building. They're waiting to see if you return, if Marcus shows up, if anyone connected to him tries to access the apartment. So how do we get the laptop?" "You're going to walk right through the front door," Agent Kim said. "You're going to act like a heartbroken woman who needs to collect some personal items before going to stay with her parents in Seattle. You're going to be emotional, distracted, completely focused on your personal drama. While you're there, you're going to retrieve that laptop and anything else that might be relevant to David's cover." She handed me a small device that looked like a USB drive. "This is a portable hard drive cloner. If the laptop is password protected, just plug this in and it'll copy everything automatically. It takes about 15 minutes for a full clone." "What if they follow me inside?" "They won't. These guys are professionals, but they're not going to risk exposure by breaking into an apartment building in broad daylight. They'll watch you go in, wait to see if Marcus shows up, then continue their surveillance. You'll have maybe an hour before they get suspicious." I took the device, surprised by how light it felt considering its importance. "And after I get the laptop? You disappear. We've arranged for you to stay in a safe house until we can assess the full extent of the threat. Your parents will be told you're taking time to process the cancelled wedding. Your job will be told you're taking extended leave for a family emergency. For all practical purposes, Maya Chen is going to vanish for a while." The reality of what I was agreeing to hit me all at once. I was about to voluntarily walk into danger to help the FBI take down a crime syndicate, all to save a man who had lied to me about everything for 3 years. The smart thing would be to refuse, to demand protection without cooperation, to let the Bureau handle their own problems. But as I sat there in my wedding dress that would never be worn, thinking about the man I'd fallen in love with, whether his name was Marcus or David, I realized I couldn't walk away. Not because I owed him anything, but because I needed to know the truth. All of it. And the only way to get those answers was to see this through to the end. "When do we leave for the apartment?" I asked. Agent Kim checked her watch. 1 hour. That gives us time to wire you for audio and go over the building layout one more time. She paused, studying my face. "Ms. Chen, you don't have to do this. We can find other ways to get that information." "No," I said, standing up and smoothing down my robe. "I need to do this. For me, not for him. I need to know who I've really been living with for 3 years." As I prepared to walk into what could be the most dangerous hour of my life, I couldn't help but think about how different this day was supposed to be. I should have been cutting cake and dancing with my new husband. Instead, I was about to become an undercover operative in my own life story. The transformation was about to begin. The apartment building I'd called home for 2 years looked different through the lens of surveillance and deception. Agent Kim and I sat in an unmarked sedan 3 blocks away, watching through high-powered binoculars as she pointed out the Kozlov operatives positioned around the building like chess pieces. "Black sedan, 2 o'clock, she said quietly. 2 men inside, been there since 6 a.m. White van across the street, that's their communication hub. And see the man on the bench reading a newspaper? Same newspaper for 4 hours. These guys are good, but they're not invisible." I adjusted the wire taped to my ribs, the small microphone hidden beneath my sweater feeling foreign against my skin. The plan was simple in theory: walk in looking distraught, collect personal items and the laptop, walk out looking even more distraught. In practice, knowing that trained killers were watching my every move made my hands shake. "Remember," Agent Kim said, checking her earpiece one final time, "you're Maya Chen, devastated bride whose wedding was cancelled because of a family emergency. You're collecting clothes to take to Seattle where you'll be staying with your parents while your fiancé deals with his father's medical crisis. You're emotional, distracted, and completely unaware that anything unusual is happening." I nodded, running through the cover story one more time. The hardest part would be acting natural when everything about this situation was the opposite of natural. I'd never been watched by criminals before. I'd never worn a wire before. I'd never even lied to this extent before yesterday. Teams Alpha and Beta are in position, Agent Kim's radio crackled. Target apartment building secured. Overwatch confirms 3 hostile surveillance positions remain active. The walk to the building felt like a mile instead of a block. I kept my head down, clutching a large purse that concealed the hard drive cloner, trying to project the image of a woman lost in her own personal drama. As I passed the black sedan, I caught a glimpse of the men inside, one speaking quietly into a phone, the other watching me with the casual intensity of a predator tracking prey. My key still worked in the lobby door, a small relief in a day full of terrible surprises. The elevator ride to the 7th floor felt eternal, each floor chime echoing like a countdown timer. When the doors finally opened, I half expected to find someone waiting in the hallway, but it was empty except for Mrs. Patterson from 7B watering her plants. "Maya, dear," she said, her elderly voice full of concern. "I saw all the commotion on the news about wedding cancellations at fancy hotels. I hope everything's all right with you and that handsome young man of yours." Even my neighbor's innocent question felt loaded with danger now. Did Mrs. Patterson know about the surveillance? Was she part of it? Agent Kim had warned me that paranoia would be my biggest enemy, that I'd start seeing threats everywhere, even in harmless interactions. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. Marcus's father is in the hospital, so we had to postpone everything. I'm just grabbing some things before I fly out to help his family." She clucked sympathetically and continued watering her plants as I walked to apartment 7F. The familiar sight of our door, my door now, I supposed, made my chest tight with grief that was only partially manufactured for the surveillance. This had been our home. I'd picked out the welcome mat, painted the walls, arranged furniture with a man who'd been lying to me about his entire existence. Inside, the apartment looked exactly the same but felt completely foreign. The photos on the mantel showed Marcus and me at various milestones, our first vacation, last Christmas, the night he proposed. Now those images looked like evidence from a crime scene, documentation of an elaborate deception. I moved through the living room toward the bedroom, narrating my actions for the agents listening through my wire. "I'm just getting some clothes and personal items. This shouldn't take long." The bedroom closet held 3 years' worth of shared memories disguised as a cover story. Marcus's suits hanging next to my dresses, his shoes lined up beside mine, everything organized with the precision of someone whose real life depended on maintaining perfect fictional details. Behind a stack of winter coats and storage boxes, I found the laptop exactly where I remembered it. A sleek black MacBook Pro that Marcus claimed he used for personal projects and online banking. Now I wondered what secrets it really contained. What kind of intelligence had he been gathering? What evidence might it hold about the Kozlov organization? The hard drive cloner felt heavy in my hands as I connected it to the laptop's USB port. A small blue light indicated it was working, beginning the 15-minute process of copying everything. 15 minutes that felt like 15 hours. I used the time to pack a believable amount of clothing, moving through the apartment like a woman collecting pieces of a shattered life. In the bathroom, I grabbed toiletries and the prescription bottles that bore my real name, one of the few authentic things in this space. In the kitchen, I took the coffee mug Marcus had given me for my birthday, the one with "World's Best Psychology Student" printed in fading letters. Every item I touched felt contaminated by lies now. The cookbook he'd bought me for our anniversary, had he actually wanted to cook together, or was it just part of maintaining his cover as a devoted boyfriend? The houseplant we'd picked out together at the farmer's market, had that been a genuine moment of domesticity, or calculated relationship maintenance? Halfway through the copying process, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside our door. Heavy, deliberate steps that stopped right outside apartment 7F. My blood turned to ice as I heard the distinct sound of someone testing the door handle. "Agent Kim," I whispered into my wire, frozen in the middle of the bedroom with the laptop still copying. "Someone's at the door." "Stay calm," her voice came through my earpiece. "Continue what you're doing. If someone enters, you're a grieving girlfriend collecting belongings. You know nothing about anything. The footsteps moved away after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. The copying progress bar showed 87% complete. When the cloner finally finished, I disconnected it with shaking hands and returned the laptop to its hiding place exactly as I'd found it. If someone searched the apartment later, they'd find everything perfectly normal, just a woman's apartment temporarily abandoned during a family crisis. I took one last look around the bedroom, this space where I'd slept beside a stranger for 2 years without knowing it. The bed was still unmade from yesterday morning when Marcus, David, had left for what I thought was just another day at his fictional job. The pillow still held the indent of his head, and for a moment I felt a wave of genuine loss for the life I thought we'd been building together. Package secured, I said quietly into my wire. Ready to extract. The trip down to the lobby felt different this time. I was no longer Maya Chen, naive girlfriend. I was Maya Chen, civilian asset, carrying intelligence that could bring down a criminal organization and save the life of a man whose real name I'd only learned yesterday. As I walked past the same surveillance teams, I projected devastation and distraction while internally calculating distances to cover, exit routes, and potential threats. It was amazing how quickly survival instincts could override heartbreak when your life depended on it. The black sedan was still there, its occupants still watching. But now I was watching them too, and I had something they desperately wanted but didn't know I'd already taken. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was fighting back instead of just surviving. And that feeling was intoxicating. The real game was just beginning. The FBI field office in downtown Portland looked nothing like the sterile, high-tech facilities I'd seen in movies. Agent Kim led me through a maze of cramped cubicles and outdated computers to a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and desperation. The laptop data I'd retrieved was already being analyzed by a team of cyber specialists, their faces glowing blue in the light of multiple monitors. What we found on that laptop changes everything, Agent Kim said, closing the conference room door behind us. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her usually perfect suit wrinkled and her coffee cup stained with lipstick from a dozen refills. Special Agent in Charge Rebecca Martinez entered the room carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression that made my stomach clench. She was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention. When she sat down across from me, I felt like I was about to receive the worst news of my life. Ms. Chen, Agent Martinez began, opening the folder to reveal photographs and documents I couldn't quite make out from my angle. What Agent Reeves, David, was able to gather over the past 3 years is remarkable. Financial records, communication intercepts, organizational charts, even video evidence of criminal activities. This laptop contains enough information to dismantle the entire Kozlov operation on the West Coast. That should have been good news. Instead, her tone suggested something terrible was coming. However, she continued, we've discovered something that complicates our situation significantly. The Kozlov organization didn't just stumble onto David's real identity. They were led to it. Agent Kim leaned forward, her expression grim. There's a mole in the bureau, Maya. Someone with high-level access has been feeding information to the Kozlovs for at least 18 months. They know about David's operation, his cover identity, his safe houses, and... She paused, looking at Agent Martinez as if asking permission to continue. And they know about you, Martinez finished. Everything about you. Your background, your family, your daily routines, your relationship with David. They've been watching you almost as long as they've been watching him. The room seemed to shrink around me. Watching me? For 18 months? Martinez nodded grimly. Remember the car accident you had last spring? The one where you spun out on Highway 26 during that rainstorm but miraculously didn't hit anything serious? I remembered it vividly. I'd been driving home from a weekend visiting my parents in Seattle when my car suddenly lost control on a curve I'd driven dozens of times before. The police report said I'd hit a patch of oil, but the tow truck driver had seemed confused because he couldn't find any evidence of an oil spill. That wasn't an accident, Agent Kim said quietly. We found communication intercepts discussing a test run on David's girlfriend. They wanted to see how you'd react under stress, whether you'd contact David immediately, how he'd respond to you being in danger. My hands started shaking. They caused my accident. I could have been killed. That was the point, Martinez said bluntly. They were testing whether eliminating you would flush David out of deep cover. When he maintained operational discipline and didn't break character, they realized he was more professionally trained than they'd initially assumed. The conference room felt like it was spinning. Everything I thought I knew about the past year was being rewritten in real time. The random flat tire I'd gotten outside the grocery store. The food poisoning that had kept me home from work for 3 days. The break-in at my office that had seemed oddly targeted but hadn't resulted in anything being stolen. How many of these tests were there? I asked. Agent Kim consulted her notes. At least 7 incidents we can confirm. Each one designed to see how you and David would react, what protocols he'd follow, what resources he might call upon. You've been unknowingly participating in an intelligence operation for over a year. The weight of this revelation was crushing. Not only had my entire relationship been a lie, but I'd been a target without knowing it. Every moment of happiness, every milestone we'd celebrated, every quiet evening at home, all of it had been happening under the surveillance of people who viewed me as a disposable pawn in a larger game. There's more, Martinez said, though I couldn't imagine how there could possibly be more. The laptop contained details about the mole's communications with the Kozlov leadership. We've narrowed the leak down to 3 possible suspects, all of whom have access to David's operational files. She slid 3 photographs across the table. FBI personnel photos showing 2 men and 1 woman, all in their 40s or 50s, all looking like the kind of people I'd trust with my life. The problem, Agent Kim continued, is that all 3 of these suspects know about our current operation. They know we retrieved the laptop, they know you're cooperating with us, and they know we're onto the existence of a mole. Which means, Martinez added, that the Kozlovs now know you have information that could destroy them. You're no longer just a potential asset to be monitored. You're an active threat to be eliminated. As if on cue, Agent Kim's radio crackled to life. Alpha team to control. We have movement on the Chen apartment. Multiple vehicles, armed personnel. They're going in. Through the conference room's small window, I could see agents moving with urgent purpose through the bullpen. Phones were ringing, radios were chattering, and the casual atmosphere I'd observed earlier had transformed into controlled chaos. They're searching your apartment right now, Agent Kim said, listening to updates through her earpiece. Professional job, they disabled the building's security cameras, neutralized the doorman, and bypassed your locks without leaving obvious signs of forced entry. Martinez was already on her feet, gathering files. They're looking for the laptop or any evidence that David left behind. When they don't find anything, they'll escalate their search. Escalate how? They'll come looking for you directly, Agent Kim said grimly. Maya, as of this moment, you're officially in federal protective custody. Your old life, your job, your apartment, your daily routines, all of that is over. The woman who walked into this building tonight can't walk back out. The finality of her words hit me like a physical blow. What about my parents? My job? My friends? Your parents are being contacted by agents in Seattle as we speak. They'll be told you're entering witness protection due to credible threats against your life. Your employer will receive notice that you're taking indefinite leave due to a federal investigation. Your friends. Martinez paused. Your friends will be told you've left the city to deal with personal issues related to your canceled wedding. I thought about Jessica, still probably wearing her bridesmaid dress and trying to understand why her best friend's fairy tale had collapsed overnight. I thought about my colleagues at the psychology clinic where I worked, the patients who depended on me, the life I'd spent years building. This isn't fair, I said, though even as I spoke the words I knew how naive they sounded. No, it's not, Martinez agreed. But it's reality. The Kozlov organization doesn't leave witnesses, Maya. They don't negotiate, they don't show mercy, and they don't forget. The only way you survive this is if we eliminate the threat entirely. Agent Kim sat down beside me, her expression softer now. I know this is overwhelming. But Maya, what you did today, retrieving that laptop, it might be the breakthrough we need to end this. The intelligence David gathered, combined with what we know about the mole, gives us our best shot at taking down the entire network. And David? I asked. What happens to him? Martinez and Kim exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. David is currently in a federal safe house outside Washington, D.C., Martinez said carefully. He's alive, but his situation is complicated. Complicated how? Another pause. Another exchanged glance. The Kozlovs didn't just identify David as an FBI agent, Agent Kim said slowly. They identified him as the FBI agent who's been feeding information to a rival organization. Someone has framed him as a double agent working for the Russian mob. The room went completely silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of ringing phones. David wasn't just running from the Kozlovs. He was running from his own people too. And somehow, I was the only person who might be able to prove his innocence. The safe house was a nondescript ranch home in the suburbs of Beaverton, the kind of place that screamed witness protection to anyone who knew what to look for. Bulletproof windows disguised as regular glass, reinforced doors that looked ordinary but could withstand a small explosion, and enough surveillance equipment hidden in fake smoke detectors to monitor a small city. Agent Kim had driven me there in the dead of night, taking a route that included 4 different vehicle changes and enough counter-surveillance maneuvers to make my head spin. Now, sitting in what the FBI called a secure facility, but felt more like a prison with better cable TV, I was about to learn exactly how deep this conspiracy went. The woman who entered the living room at dawn looked nothing like what I expected from an FBI cybercrime specialist. Dr. Rachel Torres was barely 30, with purple streaks in her black hair and enough tattoos covering her arms to tell a dozen stories. She carried 3 laptops and wore the kind of exhausted expression that came from surviving on energy drinks and determination. Maya Chen, she said, settling into the chair across from me and opening her first laptop. I've been analyzing the data you retrieved for the past 8 hours. What I found is going to change everything you think you know about your relationship with David Reeves. Agent Kim poured coffee from a pot that had clearly been brewing all night. The caffeine was barely keeping me conscious after a sleepless night of processing the revelation that my entire life had been a carefully orchestrated lie. Before we begin, Dr. Torres continued, I need you to understand something about deep cover operations. When an agent spends years building a false identity, the line between who they really are and who they're pretending to be gets blurred. Sometimes irreversibly. She turned her laptop screen toward me, displaying what looked like financial records and communication logs. David Reeves joined the FBI 12 years ago, straight out of college. Brilliant analytical mind, fluent in 3 languages, psychology degree from Stanford. He was recruited specifically for long-term undercover work. The screen showed a younger version of the man I knew, clean-shaven and wearing a suit that looked like it came from a government budget rather than the expensive wardrobe Marcus Torrino had maintained. This David looked earnest, idealistic, like someone who believed he could change the world through law enforcement. His first assignment was a 2-year infiltration of a money laundering operation in Los Angeles. Successful operation, clean extraction, no complications. Dr. Torres clicked to the next screen. His second assignment was a 3-year operation targeting arms dealers in San Francisco. Also successful, but this is where things get interesting. The new screen showed psychological evaluation reports, the kind of assessments that looked like they'd been written by someone very much like me. During the San Francisco operation, David began showing signs of what we call identity bleed. The personality he'd created for the cover assignment started influencing his real personality. He became more aggressive, more paranoid, more willing to bend rules to maintain his cover. Agent Kim sat down beside me, her expression serious. It's not uncommon in long-term undercover work. The human mind isn't designed to maintain completely separate identities for years at a time. Eventually, they start to merge. Dr. Torres pulled up a series of communication records. When David was assigned to the Kozlov operation 3 years ago, the psychological evaluation recommended against using him for another deep cover assignment. The report suggested he needed time to reintegrate his real identity before taking on another long-term role. But they used him anyway? I asked, though I was beginning to understand the answer. The Kozlov operation was too important, and David was the only agent with the right skill set and background to pull it off. So they approved the assignment with enhanced monitoring and regular psychological check-ins. Dr. Torres's expression darkened. Those check-ins stopped happening about 18 months ago. She clicked to a new screen showing what appeared to be therapy session notes. Maya, did David ever talk to you about seeing a counselor or therapist? Required sessions for his job. I thought back through 3 years of conversations. He mentioned something once about mandatory wellness check-ins for employees in high-stress positions. Said it was just FBI bureaucracy, nothing serious. Those weren't wellness check-ins, Agent Kim said grimly. Those were psychological evaluations designed to monitor his mental state and prevent him from losing himself in the Marcus Torrino identity. Dr. Torres pulled up another set of files. According to these records, David missed his last 4 scheduled evaluations. When his handler tried to contact him directly, David claimed the sessions were interfering with his operation and requested permission to skip them until the assignment was complete. The implications were starting to become clear, and they were terrifying. You're saying that David might not know who he really is anymore? I'm saying that the David Reeves who entered this operation 3 years ago and the Marcus Torrino who's been living with you might be 2 different people, Dr. Torres said carefully. And we have evidence that suggests the Kozlov organization has been exploiting that confusion. She opened her final laptop, revealing communication intercepts that looked like they'd been pulled from encrypted messaging systems. These are conversations between Kozlov operatives and someone using David's real FBI communication codes. Someone who's been providing detailed intelligence about bureau operations for the past 18 months. I felt my stomach drop. You think David is actually working for the Kozlovs? We think David believes he's working for the FBI while unknowingly providing intelligence to the Kozlovs, Agent Kim said. Maya, psychological manipulation is one of their most effective tools. If they identified his identity confusion early enough, they could have spent months convincing him that his real FBI contacts were the enemy and that his Kozlov contacts were his true handlers. Dr. Torres turned her screen toward me, showing a series of encrypted messages that appeared to be intelligence reports. These communications show detailed knowledge of FBI's safe house locations, operational procedures, and the identities of other undercover agents. Information that only someone with David's level of access would have. But also, Agent Kim added, information that someone experiencing severe identity displacement might genuinely believe he was authorized to share. The picture they were painting was heartbreaking and terrifying in equal measure. The man I'd fallen in love with wasn't just lying to me, he might not even know who he really was anymore. He might genuinely believe that everything he'd been doing was legitimate FBI work. There's more, Dr. Torres said, though I wasn't sure I could handle any more revelations. The psychological manipulation appears to extend to his relationship with you. We found evidence that the Kozlov specifically instructed him to maintain his romantic relationship as part of his cover. She pulled up what looked like conversation transcripts. These communications suggest that David was told that ending his relationship with you would compromise his cover and endanger the operation. He was encouraged to deepen the relationship, to move in together, even to propose marriage. I stared at the screen, reading fragments of conversations that discuss my relationship like it was a strategic asset. So even the proposal was fake? That's where it gets complicated, Agent Kim said softly. Because according to these psychological evaluations, David's feelings for you appear to be genuine. The Marcus Torrino personality genuinely loves Maya Chen. The question is whether any part of David Reeves is still accessible, or if he's completely lost in the identity he created. Dr. Torres closed her laptops and leaned back in her chair. Maya, we believe David is currently being held at a location where his handlers, whoever they really are trying to convince him that you've been compromised, that you're working with enemy agents, and that his only chance of survival is to cooperate fully with their instructions. You mean they're turning him against me? We mean they're trying to convince him that you never really existed, Agent Kim said. That Maya Chen was just another part of his cover story, a fictional girlfriend created to make Marcus Torrino seem more believable. The room went completely silent. The idea that the man I'd loved might be convinced that I was just another lie in his elaborate fiction was almost too much to process. "So what do we do?" I asked finally. Dr. Torres smiled for the first time since our conversation began. "We're going to use their own psychological manipulation against them. Maya, you're about to become the most important weapon the FBI has ever deployed. Because if anyone can reach the real David Reeves through the Marcus Torrino identity, it's the woman he genuinely fell in love with. And if David really is gone? If there's nothing left of him to reach?" Agent Kim's expression was grim but determined. "Then you're going to help us take down the people who destroyed him." The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. when I was lying awake in the safe house bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything I'd learned about David's psychological manipulation. Dr. Torres burst into the room without knocking, her laptop clutched against her chest and her eyes wide with excitement. "Maya, get up. We found something," she said, her voice vibrating with the kind of energy that comes from a major discovery. "We've been approaching this all wrong. The Kozlovs didn't just manipulate David. They've been manipulating the entire FBI investigation." Agent Kim appeared in the doorway behind her, fully dressed despite the late hour. "The mole isn't who we thought it was. It's bigger than that." We gathered in the living room, where Dr. Torres had set up what looked like a command center. Multiple screens displayed financial records, communication logs, and what appeared to be surveillance footage from various locations around Portland. The coffee table was covered with printed documents and photographs that painted a picture I was only beginning to understand. "Remember the 3 suspects we showed you yesterday?" Dr. Torres asked, pulling up the FBI personnel photos. "We've been assuming one of them was feeding information to the Kozlovs. But when I analyzed the data from David's laptop more carefully, I found something that changes everything." She clicked through a series of financial records that looked like they'd been pulled from multiple banking systems. "The payments to the Kozlov organization aren't coming from any of our suspected moles. They're coming from a shell company that's been operating for 7 years, long before David's current assignment began." Agent Kim sat down beside me, her expression grim. "Maya, the corruption in this case goes back to David's very first undercover assignment. Someone has been using FBI operations to build their own criminal network for nearly a decade." The screens showed a complex web of financial transactions, shell companies, and offshore accounts that made my head spin. But even with my limited understanding of financial crimes, I could see the pattern Dr. Torres was highlighting: a systematic siphoning of resources from legitimate FBI operations into private accounts. "The beautiful part of their scheme," Dr. Torres continued, "is that they've been using real FBI agents as unwitting accomplices. They identify agents who are vulnerable to psychological manipulation, usually those suffering from identity displacement during long-term undercover work, and convince them they're part of a special operations unit." She pulled up what looked like organizational charts. "David isn't the only agent who's been compromised. We've identified at least 6 other deep cover operatives who've been feeding information to what they believe are specialized FBI handlers but are actually criminal coordinators." My psychology training finally kicked in, helping me understand the sophisticated nature of what had been done to David. They're exploiting the identity confusion that comes with long-term undercover work. These agents think they're being recruited for elite assignments when they're actually being recruited as criminal assets. "Exactly," Agent Kim said. "And because the agents genuinely believe they're working for the Bureau, they pass every polygraph test, maintain their security clearances, and continue to have access to classified operations." Dr. Torres opened another laptop, revealing what appeared to be psychological profiles and assessment reports. "Maya, your relationship with David wasn't just part of his cover story. It was part of his psychological anchoring system. The people running this operation knew that agents with strong emotional connections are less likely to completely lose themselves in their cover identities. The implications were staggering. So they encouraged David to fall in love with me because it would keep him stable enough to be useful? They encouraged Marcus Torrino to fall in love with you," Agent Kim corrected. "But what they didn't anticipate was that David Reeves would fall in love with you too. That created a psychological conflict they couldn't control." Dr. Torres pulled up what looked like recent communication intercepts. These are conversations from the past 48 hours. David's handlers are becoming increasingly frustrated because he's not responding to their psychological manipulation the way he used to. Something is anchoring him to his real identity, and they can't figure out what it is. That something is you, Agent Kim said. Maya, David's love for you is the one genuine emotion that exists in both his real identity and his cover identity. It's the thread that's keeping David Reeves accessible even while Marcus Torrino dominates his conscious mind. Dr. Torres turned her screen toward me, showing what appeared to be surveillance footage from multiple angles of a nondescript office building. This is where they're holding David right now. It's disguised as a private therapy clinic, but it's actually a psychological manipulation facility where they're trying to convince him that his memories of you are artificial implants designed to compromise his loyalty. The footage showed David, Marcus, whoever he was now, sitting in what looked like a therapy session with a woman in a white coat. Even through the grainy surveillance video, I could see the confusion and distress on his face as she apparently challenged everything he believed about his own experiences. They're trying to convince him that his love for you is a false memory planted by enemy agents, Agent Kim explained. Standard psychological warfare technique, make the subject question their most fundamental emotional experiences. I watched the man I loved being systematically tortured through psychological manipulation, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It wasn't even about love. It was about basic human dignity and the right to know your own mind. What's our play? I asked, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Dr. Torres smiled grimly. We're going to give them exactly what they think they want. Maya, you're going to walk into that facility and surrender yourself to David's handlers. That sounds like suicide. It would be, if you were really surrendering, Agent Kim said. But what we're actually doing is placing the one person who can break through their psychological conditioning directly into their facility. Maya, you're going to be our Trojan horse. Dr. Torres pulled up building schematics and security protocols. The facility operates under the cover of treating FBI agents for PTSD and operational stress. They'll believe you're a civilian asset who's been compromised and needs to be neutralized. What they won't realize is that you understand exactly what they've been doing to David. My psychology training, I said, beginning to understand the plan. Your psychology training, Agent Kim confirmed. You know how to recognize and counter psychological manipulation techniques. More importantly, you know David well enough to reach whatever part of his real identity is still fighting to surface. Dr. Torres opened her final laptop, revealing detailed profiles of the facility's staff and security protocols. Maya, this is incredibly dangerous. If they realize you're not just a compromised civilian, if they figure out that you're actively working against their psychological conditioning, they'll kill me, I finished. They'll do worse than kill you, Agent Kim said bluntly. They'll try to break your mind the same way they've been breaking David's. And unlike David, you don't have years of FBI training to help you resist. I looked at the surveillance footage again, watching David struggle with confusion and doubt as his captors systematically dismantled his sense of reality. The man who'd brought me coffee every morning, who'd remembered my favorite books, who'd proposed to me in the exact spot where we'd had our first date, that man was still in there somewhere, fighting to remember who he really was. When do we start? I asked. Dr. Torres checked her watch. The facility opens for emergency consultations in 4 hours. We'll stage your capture to look like you were trying to flee the city and got picked up by local law enforcement. They'll contact the facility within hours to arrange for your psychological evaluation. And then? Agent Kim's expression was deadly serious. And then you walk into hell and try to bring back the man you love. Maya, once you're inside that facility, we can't extract you. If this goes wrong, you'll disappear just like the other civilians who've gotten too close to this operation. I thought about the wedding dress hanging in a hotel room I'd never see again, about the life I'd been building with a man whose real name I'd only learned 2 days ago, about the parents who thought their daughter was grieving a postponed wedding instead of preparing to infiltrate a criminal conspiracy. I understand, I said. Let's bring David home. But even as I spoke the words, I wondered if the David Reeves who joined the FBI 12 years ago still existed to be brought home, or if we were all chasing the ghost of a man who'd been lost long before I ever met him. In 4 hours, I'd find out. The staged arrest happened exactly as planned. At 7:15 a.m., 2 Portland police officers, actually FBI agents in borrowed uniforms, pulled me over 3 blocks from the Greyhound station carrying a hastily packed suitcase and a one-way ticket to Vancouver. To any observer, I looked like a panicked woman trying to flee the country after her world collapsed. The arresting officers made a show of finding the ticket and calling in my identity to dispatch. Within minutes, my name triggered alerts in whatever system the criminal organization had infiltrated. By 8 a.m., I was sitting in a downtown holding cell waiting for representatives from the FBI Psychological Services Division to collect me for evaluation. Dr. Helena Vasquez arrived at 9:30 a.m. wearing the kind of professional smile that never reached her eyes. She was exactly what central casting would order for a government psychologist, mid-40s, perfectly pressed blazer, briefcase that cost more than most people's rent. What the casual observer wouldn't notice were the subtle tells that Dr. Torres had trained me to recognize: the way she positioned herself between me and the exit, the micro-expressions that suggested she was evaluating me as a threat rather than a patient. "Ms. Chen," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Dr. Vasquez from the Bureau's Trauma Response Unit. I understand you've been through quite an ordeal with Agent Torrino's situation." Even hearing the fake name made my chest tight, but I forced myself to play the role of a confused and frightened civilian. "I just want to understand what's happening. Marcus said his father was in the hospital, but now the police are saying he's some kind of federal agent. None of this makes sense." Dr. Vasquez nodded sympathetically as she led me through the police station corridors. Undercover operations can be very confusing for civilian contacts. That's why we have specialized facilities to help people process these situations. "I'm taking you somewhere safe where we can sort through everything that's happened." The black SUV waiting outside had government plates but felt more like a kidnapping than a rescue. Dr. Vasquez sat beside me in the back seat while a silent driver navigated through Portland traffic toward the suburbs. Everything about this felt wrong, but I reminded myself that feeling wrong was exactly the point. "Ms. Chen," Dr. Vasquez said, consulting a tablet that presumably contained my fabricated psychological profile, "I want you to know that what you're experiencing is completely normal. Many civilians who become involved with undercover agents develop what we call reality displacement. You may find yourself questioning memories, relationships, even your own perceptions." She was already starting the psychological manipulation, laying the groundwork to make me doubt my own experiences. According to Dr. Torres's briefing, this was standard protocol: convince subjects that their confusion was a mental health issue rather than the result of being deliberately deceived. "I keep thinking about all the times Marcus seemed different," I said, feeding her exactly what she wanted to hear. Like there were 2 different people inside him. Sometimes he'd look at me like he didn't recognize me, even though we'd been together for years. Dr. Vasquez made notes on her tablet, her expression professionally concerned. That's a common observation from civilian partners of long-term undercover agents. The human mind isn't designed to maintain multiple identities simultaneously. Sometimes the boundaries blur in ways that can be very disturbing for both the agent and their contacts. The facility looked exactly like Dr. Torres had described: a converted office building in Beaverton with discreet signage reading, Pacific Northwest Wellness Center. No obvious security, no indication of its real purpose, nothing to suggest that inside this unremarkable building, FBI agents were being systematically brainwashed into criminal assets. Dr. Vasquez led me through a lobby that could have belonged to any upscale medical practice. Soft music, comfortable furniture, walls lined with certificates and degrees that I now knew were probably as fake as everything else in this operation. The receptionist smiled warmly as we passed, as if I were just another patient arriving for routine therapy. "We'll start with a comprehensive assessment," Dr. Vasquez explained as we walked down a hallway lined with office doors. "Given your level of exposure to Agent Torrino's operational identity, we need to determine how deeply his psychological conditioning may have affected your own perceptions." She opened a door to reveal what looked like a standard therapy office: comfortable chairs, soft lighting, a bookshelf lined with psychology textbooks I recognized from graduate school. But I also noticed details that Dr. Torres had taught me to spot: cameras disguised as smoke detectors, soundproofing materials hidden behind decorative panels, and a computer monitor positioned so the therapist could access information while maintaining eye contact with the patient. "Please, make yourself comfortable," Dr. Vasquez said, settling into the chair across from me with her tablet ready. "I want to start by asking you about your relationship with Marcus Torrino. When did you first meet?" For the next hour, I walked through the story of my relationship with Marcus, careful to include the details that would support their narrative while omitting anything that might reveal my actual knowledge of David's situation. I played the role of a confused woman trying to make sense of a relationship that had apparently been built on lies. Dr. Vasquez guided me through what seemed like routine questions about my emotional state, my support systems, my plans for the future. But I could see the psychological mapping happening behind her professional facade. She was building a profile of my vulnerabilities, identifying the pressure points they could exploit to control my behavior. "Maya," she said, using my first name with calculated intimacy, "I need to share something with you that may be difficult to hear. Our preliminary analysis suggests that Agent Torrino's psychological state is more severely compromised than we initially realized." She turned her tablet toward me, showing what appeared to be medical records and psychological evaluations. "He's currently experiencing what we call complete identity dissolution. The David Reeves personality has been entirely subsumed by the Marcus Torrino cover identity. He genuinely believes that Marcus Torrino is his real name and that David Reeves was a fictional persona created by enemy agents." The documents looked official, complete with medical terminology and psychiatric diagnoses that would have been convincing if I hadn't known they were fabricated. Dr. Vasquez was trying to convince me that the man I loved was permanently lost, that any hope of reaching the real David was delusional thinking. "More concerning," she continued, "is his current state of agitation. He's been asking about you repeatedly, but not in the way you might expect. He believes Maya Chen is a fictional character created as part of an enemy psychological operation. He's convinced that his memories of loving you are artificial implants designed to compromise his loyalty to his real handlers." I felt tears starting to form, and for once they weren't entirely manufactured. The idea that David might genuinely believe I was just another lie in his fractured reality was almost too painful to contemplate. "What does that mean for me?" I asked. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward with practiced compassion. "It means that any contact between you and Agent Torrino would be extremely dangerous for both of you. His current psychological state makes him view you as an active threat. If he saw you now, he might react violently, believing he was defending himself against enemy manipulation. But there must be something we can do. Some way to help him remember who he really is." "Maya," Dr. Vasquez said gently, "the best thing you can do for Marcus, for both of you, is to let our specialists work with him while you focus on processing your own trauma. We have excellent facilities here for helping civilians recover from exposure to deep cover operations." The trap was being set beautifully. They wanted me to voluntarily commit myself to their treatment program, where they could work on convincing me that my entire relationship with David had been an elaborate fiction. Once they had both of us under their psychological control, they could reshape our memories to serve whatever narrative best supported their criminal operations. "What kind of treatment are we talking about?" I asked. Dr. Vasquez's smile became more genuine, the expression of a predator who'd successfully lured prey into striking range. "Intensive therapy designed to help you separate authentic memories from the psychological conditioning you experienced during your relationship. It's a process, but we've had excellent success helping civilians recover from these situations." "How long does it usually take?" "That depends on the individual case," she said, making more notes on her tablet. "Some patients find clarity within weeks. Others require months of intensive work to fully process their experiences." Months. They were planning to keep me here for months, slowly dismantling my sense of reality until I genuinely believed that my love for David was just another symptom of psychological manipulation. And somewhere in this building, they were doing the same thing to him. "Dr. Vasquez," I said, playing my final card, "I need to see him. I need to see Marcus one time, just to understand what's happened to him. Maybe if I could talk to him, help him remember." Her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Maya, that's exactly the kind of thinking we need to address in therapy. The belief that you can save Agent Torrino is itself a symptom of the psychological conditioning you've experienced. But I could see something else in her eyes now, interest. The possibility of using me as a tool to further break David's psychological resistance was clearly appealing to her. However, she said slowly, there might be therapeutic value in a carefully controlled encounter. Sometimes seeing the reality of an agent's condition can help civilians accept the truth about their situations. She was taking the bait. In a few hours, I'd be face to face with David, and we'd find out if anything of the man I loved still existed behind the psychological walls they'd built around him. The real test was about to begin. The preparation for my encounter with David took place in what Dr. Vasquez called the controlled interaction suite, a sterile room with white walls, fluorescent lighting, and cameras positioned at every angle. 2 orderlies in scrubs briefed me on safety protocols while Dr. Vasquez reviewed what she claimed were David's recent psychological evaluations. Agent Torrino has been experiencing increasingly violent episodes when confronted with reminders of his fabricated memories, she explained, showing me charts that detailed supposed aggressive incidents. He attacked a nurse yesterday when she mentioned the name Maya Chen. We've had to increase his sedation to keep him stable. The documentation looked professional, medication logs, incident reports, even video timestamps that supposedly showed David's deteriorating condition. But I recognized the psychological warfare tactics Dr. Torres had described. They were trying to convince me that the man I was about to see was dangerous, unpredictable, and completely disconnected from reality. If he becomes agitated during your interaction, Dr. Vasquez continued, you must immediately step back and allow our security team to intervene. Under no circumstances should you attempt to engage with him about your supposed relationship or try to trigger memories that don't actually exist. At 2 p.m., they led me down a corridor lined with what appeared to be patient rooms. Through small windows in reinforced doors, I caught glimpses of other patients, men and women in hospital gowns staring blankly at television screens or sitting motionless in chairs. The FBI agents who'd been psychologically broken and rebuilt as criminal assets, I realized with horror. David's room was at the end of the hall, larger than the others and equipped with additional monitoring equipment. Dr. Vasquez positioned herself at an observation window while I entered alone, my heart pounding so hard I was certain the hidden microphones would pick it up. The man sitting on the narrow hospital bed looked like David but moved like a stranger. His dark hair was unkempt, his face pale from lack of sunlight, and his eyes held a distant quality that made my chest ache. When he looked up at me, there was no recognition, no warmth, just the wary assessment of someone evaluating a potential threat. You're the Maya Chen construct, he said, his voice flat and clinical. They said you might try to contact me eventually. The words hit me like physical blows. This wasn't David speaking, it was someone who'd been convinced that I was just another layer of deception in an elaborate psychological operation. Marcus, I said softly, using the name he'd been conditioned to accept as real. It's me. It's Maya. He laughed bitterly. Impressive programming. The emotional inflection, the micro-expressions, even the way you're standing, it's all designed to trigger synthetic attachment responses. But I know what you are now. I moved closer, noting how he tensed like a coiled spring ready to strike. Dr. Torres had prepared me for this. The man I was speaking to genuinely believed that his love for me had been artificially implanted, that every tender moment we'd shared had been carefully constructed fiction. I know this is confusing, I said, keeping my voice steady. But Marcus, think about the morning you proposed to me. Remember the coffee shop where we first met? You ordered a double espresso with extra sugar, and I was reading a psychology textbook for my graduate program. His eyes flickered with something that might have been recognition before hardening again. Memory implants, he said dismissively. Sophisticated ones, but still artificial. They showed me the neural mapping data. Every supposedly authentic memory of you corresponds to documented psychological conditioning sessions. The depth of their manipulation was staggering. They'd convinced him that his own experiences were manufactured, that his capacity for love was just another tool being used against him. But I could see something underneath the programmed responses, a flicker of doubt, a moment of hesitation when I mentioned specific details they couldn't have fabricated. What about the scar on your shoulder? I said, taking another step closer. The one from when you fell off your bike when you were 8 years old. You told me about it on our third date, said it was embarrassing because you cried in front of the neighbor kids. This time the flicker lasted longer. His hand moved unconsciously toward his shoulder, where I knew a small white scar marked the spot where he'd needed 3 stitches. They briefed you thoroughly, he said, but his voice carried less conviction now. Personal details to make the deception more convincing. I could see Dr. Vasquez in my peripheral vision, taking notes through the observation window. She was probably documenting my failure to break through his conditioning, evidence that would support her narrative about the futility of trying to reach compromised agents. But I wasn't trying to break through his conditioning. I was trying to reach something deeper. Marcus, I said, dropping my voice to the intimate tone I'd used in our most private moments. Remember the night you told me about your father's death? Real father, not the FBI construct. You were 17, and you felt like you'd failed him because you weren't there when he had the heart attack. David went completely still. This was information that didn't exist in any FBI file, details I'd learned during late-night conversations when he'd let his guard down completely. Memories that predated his involvement with the Kozlov operation, experiences that belonged to David Reeves, not Marcus Torrino. That's not. He started, then stopped, confusion replacing the clinical detachment in his expression. You told me you blamed yourself for years, I continued, moving close enough to see the conflict playing out in his eyes. That you used to dream about calling him that afternoon instead of staying late at baseball practice. You said loving me was the first time since his death that you'd allowed yourself to be vulnerable with another person. His breathing changed, becoming shallow and rapid. The psychological walls they'd built around his authentic memories were developing cracks, and Dr. Vasquez was probably getting nervous behind her observation window. Stop, he whispered, but it sounded more like a plea than a command. David, I said, using his real name for the first time. I know you're in there. I know they've convinced you that everything you felt was fake, but your heart knows the difference between real love and manufactured emotion. He looked at me with something approaching recognition, and for a moment I saw the man I'd fallen in love with struggling to surface through the psychological conditioning. Then the door burst open. Session terminated, Dr. Vasquez announced, motioning for the orderlies to enter. Patient is showing signs of severe agitation. We need immediate pharmaceutical intervention. But David was already standing, moving between me and the approaching orderlies with protective instincts that no amount of conditioning could completely erase. Don't touch her, he said, and for the first time since I'd entered the room, his voice carried emotional weight instead of clinical detachment. Dr. Vasquez was speaking rapidly into a radio, calling for additional security, but I could see panic behind her professional facade. David was breaking through their psychological barriers faster than they'd anticipated, and that made him dangerous to their operation. Maya, David said, turning toward me with eyes that were suddenly, unmistakably his own. Whatever they've told you about me, whatever they're planning to do to you, you have to fight it. Promise me you'll fight it. The orderlies were closing in with what looked like sedative injectors, but David grabbed my hand with desperate urgency. The laptop, he whispered so quietly that only I could hear. Everything they need to know is in the hidden partition. Password is the date we first said we loved each other. Then the sedatives hit him, and I watched the man I loved disappear behind a wall of pharmaceutical haze, his last conscious act an attempt to protect me from the people who'd already destroyed his sense of reality. Dr. Vasquez led me from the room, her earlier professional demeanor replaced by barely controlled anger. That was exactly what we were hoping to avoid, she said. Agent Torrino's attachment to the Maya Chen construct is more deeply embedded than we realized. We're going to need to take a more aggressive therapeutic approach. As they escorted me back down the hallway, I realized that our brief connection had changed everything. David was still fighting somewhere inside the psychological maze they'd built around him. But more importantly, he'd just given me the key to bringing down the entire operation. Now I just had to survive long enough to use it. The intensive therapeutic intervention began that evening in what Dr. Vasquez euphemistically called the deep processing suite. The room looked like a high-tech torture chamber disguised as a medical facility, reclining chairs with built-in restraints, for stands loaded with unmarked medications, and monitors displaying brain wave patterns in real time. Maya, Dr. Vasquez said, her professional mask completely discarded now, what happened today with Agent Torrino demonstrates exactly why civilian contacts require immediate intervention. Your emotional attachment to fabricated memories is creating dangerous instabilities in our recovery process. 2 technicians in scrubs prepared syringes while Dr. Vasquez consulted a tablet displaying what appeared to be my psychological profile. But I could see the truth behind their clinical facade. This wasn't therapy. It was systematic brainwashing designed to make me forget everything I'd learned about their operation. The treatment we're beginning tonight will help you separate authentic experiences from the artificial memories implanted during your relationship, she continued, approaching with a syringe filled with clear liquid. Some patients find the process disorienting initially, but the clarity that emerges is liberating. I forced myself to remain calm while calculating distances to exits and evaluating potential weapons. Dr. Torres had prepared me for this scenario, but theoretical preparation felt inadequate when facing the reality of chemical conditioning. What exactly is in that syringe? I asked, buying time while scanning the room for any advantage. A mild sedative combined with medications that enhance memory recall and reduce emotional attachment to traumatic experiences, Dr. Vasquez explained with practiced lies. Think of it as pharmaceutical therapy designed to help you process difficult truths. The password David had whispered echoed in my mind, the date we first said we loved each other. March 15, 2022, during a weekend trip to the coast when I'd finally admitted what I'd been feeling for months. That memory belonged to Maya and David, not to any fictional construct or psychological operation. Before we begin, I said, I need to understand something. If my memories of Marcus are all fabricated, how do you explain the physical evidence? Photographs, text messages, shared experiences with witnesses? Dr. Vasquez paused, studying my expression with new wariness. Sophisticated intelligence operations require sophisticated cover stories. Photographs can be manipulated, messages can be fabricated, witnesses can be compromised or coached. What about my psychology training? I pressed. Wouldn't my education have prepared me to recognize psychological manipulation? Your educational background is exactly why you were selected as a target, she said, moving closer with the syringe. Individuals with psychology training often believe they're immune to conditioning, which makes them more susceptible to sophisticated techniques. But I could see doubt creeping into her expression. Something about my questions was triggering her professional paranoia, making her wonder if I knew more than I was revealing. Dr. Vasquez, I said, playing my most dangerous card, what if I told you that I've known about the hidden partition on David's laptop since before my supposed capture? She froze completely, the syringe halfway to my arm. What did you say? The encrypted files containing evidence of FBI corruption, the financial records linking bureau operations to criminal organizations, the communication logs proving that agents like David have been unknowingly serving as assets for the past 7 years. I kept my voice steady despite the terror coursing through my system. I've seen all of it. The technicians looked confused, but Dr. Vasquez's face had gone pale. She was rapidly calculating implications, trying to determine if I was bluffing or if their operation had been compromised from the beginning. That's impossible, she said, but her voice carried uncertainty now. You're a civilian. You have no training in digital forensics or intelligence analysis. I don't, I agreed. But Dr. Rachel Torres from the FBI's Cyber Crimes Division does. And she's been working with me since the night I retrieved David's laptop from our apartment. Dr. Vasquez stepped back, lowering the syringe as she processed this revelation. I could see her professional mind working through the implications. If I really had been cooperating with legitimate FBI investigators, then my presence here wasn't accidental capture but deliberate infiltration. You're lying, she said, but she was already reaching for the radio clip to her belt. This is another layer of psychological manipulation designed to disrupt our therapeutic process. March 15, 2022, I said quietly. That's the password for the hidden partition. The date David and I first said we loved each other, back when he still remembered who he really was. The blood drained from her face completely. The only way I could know that password was if David had given it to me, which meant our interaction earlier had been far more successful than she'd reported to her superiors. Security to deep processing suite, she spoke rapidly into her radio. We have a code 7 situation. Civilian asset may be compromised. But I was already moving. Dr. Torres had drilled me on the facility's layout during our preparation, and I knew that the deep processing suite was located in the basement with limited exits and heavy soundproofing. If I was going to escape, it had to be now, before their security team arrived. The first technician moved to block my path, but my psychology training had included coursework in crisis intervention and de-escalation techniques. I'd learned basic self-defense as part of working with potentially violent patients, and more importantly, I'd learned how to read body language and exploit hesitation. The technician expected me to run toward the door. Instead, I grabbed the 4-stand and swung it toward the monitors displaying my supposed brain wave patterns, sending sparks and shattered glass across the room. In the confusion, I reached Dr. Vasquez's tablet and activated the emergency communications system that Dr. Torres had taught me to recognize. Alpha Team, this is Phoenix, I spoke into the tablet's microphone, using the code phrase Dr. Torres had drilled into me. Package is secure, requesting immediate extraction. Dr. Vasquez lunged for the tablet, but I was already moving toward the emergency exit that building codes required even in basement facilities. The alarm system activated as I hit the crash bar, flooding the corridor with red light and deafening sirens. Behind me, I could hear Dr. Vasquez screaming orders into her radio, lock down the facility. The Chen asset has been compromised. Initiate Phoenix Protocol immediately. Phoenix Protocol. Even as I ran through corridors filled with smoke and flashing lights, I wondered what that meant for David and the other agents being held here. The emergency exit led to a parking garage where Agent Kim was waiting in an unmarked sedan, engine running. I dove into the passenger seat as she gunned the engine toward the street. "Did you get it?" she asked as we raced through suburban Portland. David remembered, I gasped, adrenaline making my voice shake. The real David is still in there, and he gave me the password. March 15, 2022. Agent Kim smiled grimly as she spoke into her radio. "Control, this is Kim. We have confirmation of subject's cognitive status and access codes for encrypted intelligence. Requesting immediate tactical support for facility raid." As we drove towards safety, I looked back at the innocuous office building that housed such sophisticated evil. Somewhere inside, David and dozens of other agents were trapped in psychological prisons, convinced that their authentic selves were enemies to be destroyed. But now we had the keys to free them all. "Maya," Agent Kim said as we merged into traffic, "what you did tonight was incredibly brave. And incredibly stupid. If that communication system hadn't worked." "I know," I said, watching the facility disappear in the distance. But Dr. Vasquez mentioned something called Phoenix Protocol when they realized I'd escaped. "What does that mean?" Agent Kim's expression darkened. "It means they're going to start eliminating evidence. Maya, we probably have less than an hour before they begin killing everyone in that facility, including David." The race against time had begun. The FBI Tactical Command Center had been established in an abandoned warehouse 3 miles from the psychological facility, transforming the empty space into a high-tech operations hub within hours. Dozens of agents moved with urgent precision, setting up communication arrays, weapon stations, and monitoring equipment while Dr. Torres worked frantically to decrypt the hidden partition using David's password. "We have movement inside the facility," Agent Martinez announced, studying surveillance feeds from microdrones positioned around the building. "They're evacuating non-essential personnel through the back exits and moving patients to what appears to be a secure wing in the basement." I stood beside Dr. Torres as she accessed David's encrypted files, watching years of carefully gathered intelligence unfold across multiple screens. Financial records, organizational charts, communication intercepts, and video evidence painted a picture of corruption that reached far deeper into the FBI than anyone had imagined. "Maya, this is extraordinary," Dr. Torres said, scrolling through David's meticulously documented evidence. "He's been building a case against the entire network for 3 years. Look at this." He identified 17 compromised agents, traced funding through 12 shell companies, and documented systematic psychological conditioning protocols. The files revealed that David had never been fully brainwashed. Instead, he'd been playing a dangerous double game, allowing his handlers to believe they were controlling him while secretly gathering evidence to expose their operation. The confused, broken man I'd seen in the facility was itself a carefully constructed performance. "He was protecting you," Agent Martinez said, reading over Dr. Torres's shoulder. "Look at this communication log." David knew they were planning to use you against him, so he prepared contingency plans to make his psychological breakdown appear genuine while maintaining access to their systems. Agent Kim burst into the command center carrying a tactical radio and wearing full combat gear. "We have a problem. Phoenix Protocol isn't just about eliminating evidence, it's about eliminating witnesses. Our surveillance shows they're preparing to execute everyone in that facility, including their own staff." Dr. Torres pulled up building schematics overlaid with real-time thermal imaging from the drones. 17 heat signatures in the basement level, probably the compromised agents. But they're being moved to a single room, which suggests mass elimination, Agent Martinez finished grimly. "How long do we have?" "Based on the activity patterns, maybe 20 minutes before they begin the executions." I stared at the thermal images showing David and 16 other agents being herded like cattle toward their deaths, and felt something crystallize inside me. These people had stolen 3 years of my life, destroyed the minds of countless FBI agents, and built a criminal empire on the foundations of psychological torture. But they'd made one crucial mistake: they'd underestimated how far someone would go to save the person they loved. "I'm going in with the tactical team," I announced. "Absolutely not," Agent Martinez said immediately. "Maya, you're a civilian. You've done more than enough already. I'm the only person here who can identify which prisoners are genuine FBI agents and which might be facility staff in disguise," I argued. "More importantly, I'm the only one who might be able to reach David if he's still performing psychological breakdown as cover." Dr. Torres looked up from her computers. "She's right about identification. According to these files, several facility staff members had been using patient disguises to avoid accountability if the operation was exposed. In a chaotic raid situation, we might accidentally kill the people we're trying to save." Agent Kim checked her weapon and nodded grimly. "Maya knows David better than anyone. If he's conscious and aware during the extraction, she might be the difference between successful rescue and friendly fire incident." Agent Martinez studied the building schematics one more time before making her decision. "You wear full body armor, you stay behind the tactical team at all times, and you follow every order without question. The moment this operation becomes too dangerous, you're extracted whether you like it or not." Putting on FBI tactical gear felt surreal: bulletproof vest over my civilian clothes, helmet that obscured my peripheral vision, communication headset that crackled with urgent updates from surveillance teams. I looked like someone playing dress-up for a very dangerous game. "Alpha team in position at primary entrance," came the voice through my headset. "Beta team covering rear exits. Charlie team standing by for basement access through storm drainage system." Dr. Torres handed me a tablet displaying the decrypted files from David's laptop. "Maya, if something goes wrong in there, if we can't extract everyone safely, make sure this intelligence reaches the authorities. These files contain enough evidence to prosecute hundreds of people involved in this conspiracy." The tactical assault began with precision choreography. Flashbang grenades disabled the facility's security systems while entry teams breached multiple access points simultaneously. Through my headset, I listened to agents calling out room clearances as they swept through the building. "Control, Alpha team has secured main level. Multiple targets detained, no resistance encountered. Beta team confirming rear exit secured. Found evidence of document destruction in progress. Charlie team approaching basement level. Thermal imaging shows all targets concentrated in northeast corner room." I followed Alpha team's leader down the corridor where I'd walked just hours earlier, the familiar white walls now scarred with smoke damage and emergency lighting. The transformation from medical facility to crime scene was jarring but somehow appropriate. The veneer of professional respectability had been stripped away to reveal the ugly truth beneath. "Maya," Agent Kim's voice came through my headset. "We're approaching the room where they're holding the prisoners. Stay behind cover until we've secured the area." The basement corridor echoed with shouted commands and the sound of doors being forced open. Through the chaos, I could hear Dr. Vasquez's voice screaming instructions to someone, though I couldn't make out the words. Control, Alpha Team has visual on 17 prisoners in basement room. They appear to be restrained and sedated, but alive. Request medical support immediately. Charlie Team has detained 3 facility staff members attempting to destroy computer equipment. Seizing all electronic evidence. Agent Kim appeared beside me, motioning toward the open door of what had been the prisoners' holding area. Maya, we need you to identify which of these people are FBI agents and which might be facility personnel. I entered the room to find 17 men and women in hospital gowns sitting or lying on narrow cots, most appearing heavily sedated. Some faces I recognized from Dr. Torres's briefings about compromised agents. Others were complete strangers who might have been patients, staff, or innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. And there, in the far corner, was David. He looked more alert than the others, his eyes tracking my movement across the room with recognition that seemed genuine rather than drug-induced confusion. When our eyes met, he mouthed a single word that made my heart race: run. Then I heard Dr. Vasquez's voice behind me, "Hello again, Maya. I was hoping we'd have one more chance to complete your therapy." I turned to find her standing in the doorway with what looked like a detonator in her hand, her professional facade completely abandoned in favor of desperate fury. Phoenix Protocol was never about eliminating witnesses, she said, her voice carrying the calm precision of someone who'd accepted that their world was ending. It was about ensuring that if this operation was exposed, no one would survive to testify about what they'd experienced. Through my headset, I could hear Agent Kim screaming orders: bomb threat. Everyone out now. Clear the building immediately. But Dr. Vasquez was already pressing the button. The explosion that followed would change everything. The explosion never came. Instead of detonation, Dr. Vasquez's device emitted a small electronic beep and a red light that flashed twice before going dark. Her expression of triumphant desperation crumbled into confusion as she pressed the button repeatedly, getting nothing but empty clicks. Bomb disposal team disarmed all explosive devices 40 minutes ago. Agent Kim's voice came through my headset as she appeared behind Dr. Vasquez with her weapon drawn. Did you really think we'd storm a facility without checking for self-destruct mechanisms first? Dr. Vasquez dropped the useless detonator, her shoulders sagging with the weight of complete defeat. You don't understand what you've done, she whispered. This operation has been protecting national security for 7 years. Without our intelligence network, the Bureau will be blind to threats that could destroy this country. The only threat here was you, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. You turned FBI agents into unwilling criminal assets and convinced them they were serving their country while they built your empire. David was struggling to sit up on his cot, the sedatives in his system fighting against his determination to stay conscious. When I knelt beside him, his eyes were clearer than they'd been during our earlier encounter, focused with the intensity of someone fighting through pharmaceutical fog. Maya, he whispered, his real voice emerging through the chemical haze. The files, did you get them? We got everything, I said, taking his hand in mine. David, it's over. We know about the psychological conditioning, the compromised agents, all of it. You're safe now. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Not David, he said quietly. Not Marcus either. I don't know who I am anymore. The admission broke my heart because it was so brutally honest. 3 years of maintaining multiple identities while gathering evidence against a criminal conspiracy had left him genuinely uncertain about which thoughts and feelings belonged to his authentic self. You're the man who remembered our anniversary even when he was deep undercover, I said, brushing hair away from his forehead. You're the person who called me every night when you were supposedly on business trips because you missed hearing my voice. You're the one who proposed to me in the exact spot where we first met because details like that mattered to you. Dr. Torres entered the room with a medical team, immediately beginning to assess the sedated agents while documenting everything for evidence. Maya, we need to get these people to a secure medical facility. The psychological deprogramming process could take months, and some of them may never fully recover their authentic personalities. But David was already sitting up, fighting off the medical technician who tried to check his vitals. I need to debrief, he said with professional determination that sounded like the FBI agent he'd been before this nightmare began. There are details in my memory that didn't make it into the encrypted files. Information about other operations, other compromised agents. That can wait, Agent Martinez said, entering the room with handcuffed prisoners in tow. Dr. Vasquez was among them, her face a mask of professional composure even in defeat. Right now, we need to process 17 victims and 43 arrests. This is going to be the largest FBI corruption case in Bureau history. Over the following hours, the true scope of the criminal network became clear. The psychological facility had been just one node in an operation that stretched across multiple states, involving corrupted agents, compromised officials, and criminal organizations that had been operating with federal protection for nearly a decade. David's intelligence, combined with evidence seized from the facility, provided prosecutors with enough material to pursue charges against over 200 individuals. The financial records alone showed that the criminal network had generated nearly $50 million in illegal profits while using FBI resources and personnel. But the human cost was harder to quantify. 17 agents had suffered varying degrees of psychological damage from the conditioning process. Some, like David, retained enough of their authentic personalities to begin recovery. Others had been so thoroughly broken and rebuilt that determining their real identities became a complex psychiatric challenge. 3 weeks later, I sat beside David in a genuine therapy office, not the sophisticated torture chamber disguised as treatment, but an actual medical facility where traumatized agents were receiving legitimate psychiatric care. He looked more like himself each day, though he still struggled with distinguishing authentic memories from the carefully constructed fiction of his cover identity. Dr. Patterson says the integration process could take years, he said, referring to the psychiatrist who specialized in treating intelligence operatives with identity-related trauma. Some days I remember being David Reeves who fell in love with Maya Chen. Other days I remember being Marcus Torrino who was manipulated into believing Maya Chen was real. And some days I can't tell the difference. What do you remember about proposing to me? I asked, a question that had become our daily test of authentic versus manufactured memory. He closed his eyes, concentrating. I remember being nervous for weeks, carrying the ring around and looking for the perfect moment. I remember practicing the speech in the mirror like a teenager. And I remember the moment I actually asked you, how your face lit up before you even heard the question, like you'd been waiting for me to find the courage. That's real, I said, taking his hand. That's David. Dr. Patterson had explained that authentic emotional memories had a different neurological signature than artificially implanted ones. Over time, David's brain was learning to distinguish between experiences that belonged to his genuine self and the sophisticated psychological conditioning he'd endured. Maya, he said, using the tone that meant he had something important to tell me. I've been thinking about the wedding. My heart skipped. We'd barely begun to rebuild our relationship, let alone discuss our interrupted future together. What about it? I remember planning it, he said slowly. I remember being excited about marrying you, about building a life together. But I also remember being terrified that my cover would be blown before we could make it official. He paused, studying my face. I don't know if the man who proposed to you was David or Marcus or some combination of both. Does it matter? I asked. He looked surprised. Doesn't it? How can you commit to marrying someone who doesn't know who he really is? I thought about everything we'd been through, the lies, the manipulation, the very real danger we'd faced together. David, I fell in love with someone who brought me coffee every morning, who remembered that I hate surprise parties, who stayed up all night when I was sick with flu. I fell in love with someone who was kind and thoughtful and brave enough to risk his life gathering evidence against criminals. That could have been Marcus Torrino, he said quietly. No, I said firmly. Marcus Torrino was a character created for a mission. But kindness isn't a character trait you can fake for 3 years. Love isn't something you can manufacture on command. The man I fell in love with was real, whatever name he was using. 6 months later, we had a quiet wedding ceremony at a small chapel outside Seattle. David's real FBI colleagues attended, along with my parents and the few friends who'd been briefed on the truth about our disappearance. Dr. Torres served as my maid of honor, having become both friend and professional ally during the months of testimony and trials that followed. David still struggled with identity integration, but he'd made remarkable progress. The authentic David Reeves was emerging stronger each day, informed by his experiences but no longer controlled by them. The criminal network that had nearly destroyed him was being systematically dismantled through prosecutions that would continue for years. As we exchanged vows, I looked into David's eyes and saw something I'd never seen during our first engagement: complete honesty. No cover stories, no hidden agendas, no uncertainty about which identity was speaking. "Maya Chen," he said, using the words we'd written together, "I promise to spend the rest of my life proving that the man who loves you is real." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed him completely. The truth, it turned out, really had set us free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.